So why do youths take drugs? There are a number of reasons, including the ones we will discuss, including social disorganization, peer pressure, family factors, genetic factors, emotional problems, behavioral problems, and by choice. Do all of these sound familiar? Kind of connected into the theories that we've covered at the beginning half of the semester. Let's take the first explanation, social disorganization. It ties drug abuse. This explanation ties drug abuse to poverty, social disorganization, hopelessness. Drug use by minorities has been tied to racial prejudice, low self-esteem, poor socioeconomic status, and stress of living in a harsh urban environment. Poverty was linked to high level of mistrust and defiance found in these areas. However, there is verifiable data on the relationship between class and crime, or this verifiable data on the relationship between class and crime is actually inconclusive. The National Youth Survey found very little, if any, association between drug use and social class. So, which takes us to the next explanation, peer pressure. Adolescent drug abuse is highly correlated to the behavior of best friends, especially when there is no parental supervision. Youth's association with friends who are also substance abusers increases the probability of drug use. In fact, drug abusers actually seek out friends who are also abusers, and the association with drug abusers increases the risk of drug abuse. And research shows that peer networks may be the most significant influence on long-term substance abuse. Family factors are another explanation for adolescent drug use and abuse. Specifically, drug users often have a poor family life. Studies have shown that the majority of adolescent drug users have an unhappy childhood characterized by harsh punishment and parental neglect. The drug use and family quality connection may involve racial and gender differences. Females and European Americans, Caucasians who suffered abuse as children were more likely to have alcohol and drug arrests as adults, while abuse less likely to affect drug use was in males and African Americans. Drug abuse as the result of observing parental drug use may be one of the most important factors that causes drug abuse than any other of the family problems, especially if they learn that drugs provide pleasure. Pleasure comes from doing drugs, if that's the lesson they're learning while observing parents who use drugs. Genetic factors, another explanation for adolescent drug use and abuse. Research shows that biological children of alcoholics raised by non-alcoholic adoptive parents are found to be more likely to develop alcohol problems than natural children of adoptive parents. Additionally, identical twins, twice as likely as fraternal twins, to have similar drug usage. And interesting, as it's been shown that future substance abuse can be predicted by behavior of a child as early as 6 years old. Emotional problems as an explanation for drug use among adolescents. Some experts say that emotional problems are the link because emotional problems can strike a child regardless of their economic class, and drug abuse is not solely found in lower class youths. Youths use drugs to help them control or express unconscious needs, like to reduce feelings or escape from real or imagined feelings. Drug abusers often have an addiction-prone personality, which indicates that the cause of substance abuse may be traced to a compulsive need for mood-altering substances. Research of narcotic abusers suggests a significant percentage suffer from psychotic disorders, and half of all drug abusers may also be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorders, so emotional problems. Problem behavior syndrome. According to this theory, the problem behavior theory, an adolescent who exhibits problem behaviors or any risk-taking behaviors, for example, alcohol and drug use, truancy, delinquency, is said to have problem behavior syndrome, PBS. Researchers suggest that even when an adolescent exhibits only one or two problem behaviors, the likelihood of developing more over time is fairly certain. Substance abuse is just one of the many problems that begin early in life and persist throughout. Youths who abuse drugs are often maladjusted, emotionally distressed, and suffer from other social problems. Adolescents with PBS can have substance abuse issues, educational underachievement, unemployment, and a high rate of suicide than adolescents who do not have PBS. And then lastly, rational choice. Youths may choose to use drugs to do a whole lot of things. What they do is they weigh remember our rational choice theory? They weigh the benefits against the costs. The benefits they see, despite their mistaken belief, is they use drugs, it gets high, we get high. Makes them relax, improves their creativity, they escape reality, they increase their sexual responsiveness. So all of these pleasures, so to speak. So the rational choice theory views experimental drug use with less concern than other theories. This theory purports to maintain a realistic perspective on teenage drug use as opposed to an overly reactionary negative stance. Like teens do this for their benefit in some way, and those are the benefits that they see, that they get out of using drugs. They get high, relax, improve their creativity and such. So what is the pathway to drug abuse? Well, there is no one way, but generally it starts with a quote-unquote softer drug, like alcohol or marijuana, and even the use of nicotine. Leads to the use and abuse of more dangerous substances. In other words, involvement with soft drugs may serve as a gateway to more harmful drugs. Drinking with an adult present is a significant precursor of later substance abuse and delinquency, and serious drug users typically start with alcohol. So the conclusion that can be drawn is that if teen drinking can be reduced, the gateway to hard drugs would be narrowed. Are there patterns of teenage drug use? Are there different types of drug involvement, or are all abusers the same? Research shows that drug-involved youths do take different roles or take on different roles and different lifestyles and different patterns. So let's take a look. Drug dealing and drug use. Adolescents who distribute small amounts of drugs usually do not commit any serious delinquency acts. They do it to support their habit, and their customers are generally their friends. So we have our small amounts of drug users and sellers. Then we have our frequent dealers. Frequent dealers are the gap between alcohol drug sellers and the youth users. They are also users themselves. These youth dealers often have adults who front for them. So they give them the drugs. The adults give them the youth the drugs, and then the youth in turn sells them. Some sells the drugs, and then the youth returns the proceeds to that adult, and they keep a commission, and they get to keep some drugs for their personal use. The frequent dealers are more likely to sell drugs in parks and schools and other public places, making them hard to catch. And despite making money selling drugs, most of these small-time dealers actually hold conventional jobs and take part in normal school activities. The research is mixed regarding how lucrative it is to sell drugs. Some suggest the quote-unquote business is quite lucrative, where some can make about $2,000 a month, and therefore it's a motivating factor to be involved in selling drugs. Others say it earns the seller less than minimum wage in some instances, suggesting that there are other motivating factors to sell, possibly to have drugs to support a habit. The most serious drug-involved use distribute multiple substances and commit property and violent crimes. They represent only 2% of the teenage population, but commit 40% of robberies, assaults, and 60% of all felony thefts and drug sales. Few gender and racial differences exist, meaning girls are just as likely as boys to engage in such conduct. African Americans and Caucasians equally as well would engage in such conduct, and the classes, the middle class and lower class kids, the same. It's no different. This group of youths do use drugs, but they refrain from using the highly addictive drugs. And then lastly, we have our persistent offenders. About 2/3 of substance abusing youth continue to use drugs into their adulthood. Characteristics of persistent offenders include they often come from poor families. The family members have often been criminals. The family members often include other criminals, so it could be parents, it could be siblings. Typically, they do poor in school. They started using drugs and committing other delinquent acts at an early age. They use multiple types of drugs and commit crimes on a regular basis. They have few opportunities in their late adolescence to participate in legitimate and rewarding adult activities. So that's our profile of a persistent offender. Kind of recap this portion of the chapter. Some kids take drugs because they live in disorganized areas in which there is a high degree of hopelessness, poverty, and despair. There is peer pressure to take drugs and to drink. Kids whose parents take drugs are more likely to become abusers themselves. Some experts believe that drug dependency is a genetic condition. Youngsters with emotional problems may be drug prone. Drug use may be part of a general problem behavior syndrome. Drug use may also be rational. Kids take drugs and drink alcohol simply because they enjoy the experience. There are a number of pathways to drug abuse. Some users distribute small amounts of drugs. Others are frequent dealers, while other groups supplement drug dealing with other crimes. So that's the general overview of this discussion. We are next going to talk about whether or not there is an association between drug use and delinquency.